I've always had a soft spot for Link's Awakening. It's partly because the original Link's Awakening began as an attempted Game Boy port of my favorite game, A Link to the Past, but it wasn't until the Super Nintendo Visage was shed that Link's Awakening would become the timeless classic we know today. What makes the game brilliant is its depth and ingenuity. Link's Awakening isn't preoccupied with the vastness of its scope more so than it is focused on the density of its content. It doesn't need to be massive because it packs the allure of discovery into every screen, every tile, every puzzle, and every challenge. The entire journey is jammed into a tiny little Game Boy cartridge measuring less than a megabyte. Link's Awakening is, quite frankly, a masterpiece. So how does Link's Awakening 2019 hope to measure up to this incredible standard? Let's find out. This review and the related footage is based on a physical retail copy of the game for the Nintendo Switch. For the uninitiated, Link's Awakening follows the journey of our titular hero, Link. Following the events of Link to the Past, Link sets sail in search of further training. Along the way, a wild storm erupts and wrecks Link onto the mysterious Koholint Island. When he awakes, Link discovers he happens to be a prophetic character in Koholint lore, which speaks of a young man who must collect the instruments of the sirens and awaken the legendary windfish before departing the island. With this knowledge in mind and a shield in his hand, Link sets out to fulfill the prophecy so that he may leave Koholint Island and continue his journey. Link's Awakening on Switch is more than just a faithful recreation of the Game Boy journey. It is nearly beat for beat the exact same game. All the twists and turns and ins and outs of the original are seen here, this time in glorious high definition. One of the most striking things about Link's Awakening has always been its departure from established Legend of Zelda themes and tropes. Princess Zelda, the Kingdom of Hyrule, and even the Triforce are all conspicuously absent from the game. This helps to differentiate Link's Awakening from the rest of the series without going so far as to alienate it from its roots. All of this is preserved in the transition to Nintendo Switch. Players familiar with the Game Boy or DX version will feel right at home with this remake. Meanwhile, new players will get to experience an incredible, uncompromised Link's Awakening, this time with all the modern bells and whistles. These modern bells and whistles are seen predominantly in the gameplay. The core mechanics are fundamentally the same as the Game Boy original. Gameplay is presented from a top-down perspective, and running around as Link and swiping at enemies or tall grass feels so satisfying. The improvements are seen primarily in the implementation of equipment. On the Game Boy, whenever you wanted to equip a specific item, you had to unequip another item in its place. Since the Game Boy only had 2 action buttons, you could only have 2 pieces of gear equipped at any time. On Nintendo Switch, however, your equipment management is much more streamlined. The Pegasus boots are mapped to the left shoulder buttons, the shield is mapped to the right shoulder buttons, the power bracelet is automatic, and the B button is always the sword. You can then map 2 pieces of gear for use, one to the X button and one to the Y button. Certain things have been added as well, such as the fairy bottles. And all of this is done on an overworld that is interconnected rather than tile-based. The world itself is a remarkably accurate recreation of the original version. For comparison, let's take a look at Link's Awakening DX. I'll be running Link's Awakening DX through the GameCube's Game Boy Player peripheral with the help of the Eon GC-HD HDMI adapter. The world has been painstakingly recreated piece by piece. Everything from the trees to the flowers have made the jump to HD. There's a very clear attention to detail on display in the remake. The fact that developer Grezzo and Nintendo were able to take the tiled map of the original and craft a seamless recreation on Switch is impressive. All these changes and improvements are mostly minor, but they go a long way towards modernizing the gameplay. Nothing is fundamentally different, the gameplay simply has greater overall utility. There is one oddity. Link's movement is restricted to 8 directions. This is in contrast to A Link Between Worlds on 3DS, which featured 360-degree movement. The 8-directional navigation is a stylistic choice, but it's an odd one that may not click with everyone. I was initially put off by this, but after completing the first dungeon, I acclimated. Additionally, the bumpiness of this motion contributes to the game's stylistic motif of artificiality. The main new gameplay feature is the Dungeon Creator. In place of the original version's Game Boy printer hub, the Switch version has Dampé guiding the player through the dungeon creation process. Unlike the seamless, contiguous overworld, dungeons are still separated into tile-based rooms, which are known in-game as chambers. Every time you discover a unique room, you get that room from Dampé as a chamber for the Dungeon Creator. Dungeon creation is broken down into a set of tasks. Think of dungeon creation as a puzzle rather than something akin to Super Mario Maker. The assigned dungeon creation tasks are simple enough. Sometimes you'll have to connect a set of stairs. Sometimes you'll have to place specific chambers in specific places. It's very easy to understand and just as easy to do. Herein lies the problem with dungeon creation. Since its mechanics are basic and its tasks seemingly arbitrary, many players will likely design linear, simplistic dungeons that are nowhere near as good as Nintendo's own thoughtfully assembled dungeons. Couple this with the fact that there's currently no online dungeon sharing, and this results in a somewhat flat execution for what could have been the best part of the game. I'm sure hardcore fans can create, and likely already have created, some fantastic dungeons and will decry this criticism. But my point is, since the only way to share your dungeons right now is via the Legend of Zelda amiibos, there's not really any built-in incentives for players to create complex, thoughtful dungeons other than to say they've done it. Consequently, well-designed dungeon creations are the exception rather than the rule. Despite the lackluster dungeon creator, however, the remake still has fantastic gameplay. The action is as satisfying as ever, and the seamlessness of the overworld is a joy to behold. The Switch version stays true to the original, while also introducing a bevy of refinements to improve the experience. Much in the same way, the music sees Link's Awakening's classic tracks return in grand fashion, now reorchestrated for a new generation. To keep it brief, the score is as brilliant as you'd expect. There are certain songs where I prefer the original Game Boy version, but that's simply a personal preference brought on by nostalgia. The new music is, in form and function, excellent. The visuals are also excellent. When docked, the game runs at an upscaled 1080p indoors and a native 720p outdoors and in dungeons. Handheld mode runs at a native 720p indoors and an upscaled 720p while outdoors and in dungeons. Link's Awakening on Switch features a unique art style that heavily implements specular reflections. These specular reflections are seen on most, if not all, in-game models. Link's Awakening's reliance on this visual theme is so much so that it's included on the Link's Awakening amiibo as well. The specular reflections are used to give the world a very plasticky look. Additionally, there's a large amount of indirect and ambient illumination, as light sources and reflective surfaces in world cast varying amounts of light onto nearby objects. Advanced shadows are also in play. Moving objects such as Link or enemies or butterflies cast dynamic shadows. The trees and grass are also animated and have animated shadows in turn. The lighting, shadows, and art style work exceptionally well together, and really sell the fake, plasticky, toy-like aesthetic of Koholint Island. The cherry on top of the sundae is the feathering around the borders of the screen, giving everything an elusive, dreamlike quality. The frame rate is the biggest issue with the remake. For the most part, Link's Awakening runs at 60 frames per second, with some semi-regular, albeit small dips peppered throughout. However, there are many places where the frame rate drops dramatically, most notably when transitioning between areas. The frame rate will tank during these transitions, dropping to around 30 FPS, then rebounding back to 60 FPS, all within a matter of seconds. These frame rate issues, both large and small, seem to stem primarily from the advanced lighting and shadows and any subsequent changes to the advanced lighting and shadows. Couple these frame rate stutters with Link's jumpy 8-directional movement, and Link's Awakening on Switch can feel less smooth and fluid than A Link Between Worlds on 3DS. None of this is game-breaking, but it does have the potential to be distracting. Some players will understandably be turned off by this. Personally, I didn't hate the performance of Link's Awakening, but I did find the framerate and consistency to be annoying at times given the game's real-time action. Still, the game is not only completely playable, but actually runs great most of the time, and once you get the Pegasus boots, the framerate becomes mostly a non-factor. Even with these problems, the visuals are beautiful, and by far do the most to hammer home that underlying theme of a synthetic, illusory world. Link's Awakening was a landmark for handheld gaming. It proved that portable did not have to mean watered down. It packed this incredible adventure right into the palm of your hand, sacrificing neither creativity nor fun. Link's Awakening on Switch is, for all intents and purposes, the exact same game. Sure, it has its issues, its framerate problems chief among them, but the pros overshadow the cons. It's impossible to say it's a bad game because it's still Link's Awakening. They say if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, Link's Awakening ain't broke, so Nintendo didn't fix it. They just made it more modern, and it's still really great. The Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening on Nintendo Switch, earns an 8.5 out of 10. Don't forget to subscribe, click the bell icon, and check out the videos on screen. Thanks for watching.
"夢は覚めて